Hi there, my name's Elliot. I'm the founder of Contrast, an e-commerce marketing agency based in the UK. And today we're going to go through the do's and don'ts of website migrations. Make sure to stick around to the end as we've got a free resource for you to download to make your life much easier when going through this process. So let's dive right into this. So first of all, we're going to take a look at what's classed as the different types of migrations, because lots of people have different ideas of what actually is classed as a migration and what's not. We'll break down the different options and go through them. Then after we've gone through that, we need to look at the risks associated with doing a migration, and we'll then talk about ultimately mitigating them down the line. The main things that come into play here when obviously you want to do a website migration or just a migration in general is that we need to do the planning phase for this so that it goes as smoothly as possible. Like, you want to have all of this done up front, and whatever issues you do run into, you can mitigate them and not have to deal with them. Obviously, any goals associated with the project that you're doing, then we'll go through a pre-launch or pre-migration section, and that's ultimately, like we say, just going through requirements, looking at what the old site has to ultimately what the new one's going to go, and looking at from the website architecture perspective. Then obviously we'll just go through just before you do an action this migration, just a checklist and testing stage, going through the migration itself, and then following on from that a review, and then a monitoring section. So there's quite a bit of content to go through here today, so we'll jump into it. Reviewing firstly here, we need to talk about the different types of migrations. So again, as we've already mentioned, lots of people kind of sometimes group these all into different ones or don't even classify them, but these are we'll go through the main ones here now that we'll be talking about. So what we'll see here is that when we're going through this list, there is a lot of different types of migrations, from very basic ones to more complex. And that's the thing here, that migrations mean different things to different people. And again, it could be just something very simple to an absolute massive amount of work to make something happen. So never two projects are alike. There is always something unique about them. So we'll go in here and we'll just talk about the first one, which being just a domain name change. So could be the case that your company has acquired, for argument's sake, a .com domain, and they've always been operating on the .co.uk, and they want to obviously just do a migration over to the .com. So essentially this will just be changing all the URLs structure. So it's not too much of a massive project, but again, that's something that could be done. Or it could be you just doing a total rebrand, and you're changing from a older URL to a completely different one. We jump into changing a CMS. So this could be, for argument's sake, you're an e-commerce company, you were just starting out trying to keep overheads down, do things yourself, and you started on WooCommerce, and it's not necessarily got the functionality of the CMS you want anymore, and it's been a little bit limiting, and you're looking to get a bit of an upgrade. You might be going to a SaaS solution like Shopify Plus or BigCommerce, or you might even be going to more on the open source higher end on like a Magento. So whatever it is, like that is changing from one CMS to another, and in doing that, because obviously it's been limited to what you need, and you need this new, for argument's sake, functionality and extra ability moving forward, that's why you are doing that as a migration. Again, with this style of migration, there is going to be a lot more involved with it because there's a lot more moving pieces. So it would again require a lot more planning to make this one happen. The next kind of migration we'll talk about is merging websites. This is when you, for argument's sake, could be a case that you've bought another company, or you've got two websites and you want to ultimately join them into one. One thing that was kind of quite common practice in probably like the early 2000s was probably people buying keyword exact match domains. So having like multiple websites. We've seen it with clients that in their kind of like portfolio, they've got like multiple websites, all just focusing on one specific thing rather than just having a main brand. So we see a lot of like consolidation these days of pulling all those sites into one and then having like a flagship store or main corporate site. So that's another way where merging websites kind of comes into play. Probably one that you might not have kind of thought about as much is like when doing an alteration to URL structures. Obviously, if you're doing that as a bit of a migration site-wide, it could be a case that you want to remove a directory out of your URL structures, or a complete URL structure change, because for argument's sake, it's been using a load of subdirectories, and you're about 3 levels deep before you get to the actual relevant page, and it's unnecessary, and you can strip that out. That again will require obviously mapping everything out, and we'll obviously talk about that a little bit later down the line. Sometimes, again, kind of probably glossed over a little bit from like URL elements. You might have seen it if you, for argument's sake, run like a WordPress website, that your permalink structure is for the blog, like including dates. So you've got the year, the month, then the day, and then the actual blog post name. So for that one, you might want to just strip that out and have / like blog, or just even remove that and just have then the blog post name. So again, that's another way of obviously reviewing and having these as looking to consolidate and just shorten the URL structures, because it's been a bit unnecessary to have all of those in. The next type of migration you might run into is a merging of content. So you've probably seen quite a few case studies more recently over the last couple of years of people talking about like pruning content, how X person removed all these blog posts and their organic traffic increased. Again, this could be literally that you've wrote loads of blog posts and you've got a bit of cannibalization. This could be then just doing a consolidation around that to help have better focus on targeting and to help hopefully increase performance moving forwards. So the next type of migration we'll want to talk about is doing a redesign. So this is something that probably people run into quite a bit, is that they've either done a rebrand or they're doing a modernization of their site, and then they're doing an overhaul of the UX of obviously how the website looks. And with this, again, this will have different elements of like ultimately different content blocks and things of that nature that will be added in, potential new pages and removal of pages. URL structures in there is up for debate what happens around on that one. Obviously try and map it out as much as possible to the old structure, but that's another type of migration. And finally, the last one is just around like website architecture. So essentially meaning, as we possibly alluded to in the previous one there, that whatever your domain is and then the subdirectory structure past that. For argument's sake, if you're an e-commerce site, you could have like, if you're a WooCommerce site, it might have product category, then the category name. It could be that you don't want it. You're moving away from WooCommerce, you don't want that product category bit there, and then you just want the actual category name. So that would be then looking at a change of website architecture. And again, obviously with all the work that would go around that, you're gonna have to do a lot of mapping and things. When we talk about the risks with migrations, it's a very risky business and a lot can go wrong. So you ultimately trying to just mitigate these things from happening. So we'll go down this list and talk about these points. But if your site's getting traffic, it's got links, it's being shared on social, like why would you want to go and mess that up and potentially go about changing things to cause like a potential loss of visibility, which results in loss of traffic, then potentially loss in sales? Like there's a lot on the line here from when going about doing these migrations. So really have to think long and hard about which bits you need to do and don't do. With that in mind, when we talk about obviously just like a content pruning and the kind of consolidation around articles, that's probably one of the least risky ones, because it's a case of we're getting rid of a lot of thin content, probably mistargeted, that is only going to help boost and help the performance of the articles that you keep. So I would say that relatively, because again, we're not changing URL structures, we're just going to redirect the old pages into the other blog posts and probably update them a bit from an on-page perspective. That's going to be like probably one of the least risky options. Then when we jump on to talking about changing CMS, normally the reason we look to move CMS is that it can't do what we need it to do moving forward. So from a functionality perspective, we're just having to do that move, because otherwise we won't be able to continue grow the company or do the things we need down the line. We've not got really kind of an option here. We're going to have to do the migration. This then comes into the next point, where it's obviously if a URL is set and it's indexed getting traffic, like if at all possible, don't change the URL structure, because That then means you're going to have to redirect it. The old page will then lose its index. The new one, you're going to have to try and get indexed, and there's a chance that you're not going to get the same amount of organic traffic coming through to the next page. So if at all possible, spending the time even like before a migration and working with clients, like make sure they have good URL structures to begin with, so you don't even have to consider doing this as an option, but we can then come on to from a URL structure down the line of how we'll deal with that. If we really do have to change the URL structures, this is where things get risky. And there's a lot more variables at play here, because essentially what we're saying here is that we're going to change the old URL, and that's then going to ultimately have to get de-indexed. It's then also, like we say, removed from the search. Then the new URL that we've redirected to is going to have to get crawled. It's then going to have to go to get rendered, then to being indexed. And then it's a case of that then is pretty much when we'll then see if we continue to get the same rankings and traffic coming through to the site. And there is no guarantee around there. Alluded to in the very beginning where we did the overview outline that a lot of planning goes up front to try and mitigate this risk as much as possible. Only do what we have to do because we don't want to take on unnecessary risk, because essentially we're probably going to be costing visibility, which essentially is lost revenue moving forwards. So as this kind of next page talks about here, you need time. You do not want to be rushing any of this. You need time to plan all the different stages to make sure that it goes as smoothly as possible, liaising with all the different internal stakeholders. Again, that will be developers, the SEOs, content team, just again, the operations side of the business. Obviously, these migrations do happen, and there is that point where there is the transfer over. There's sometimes you do see a small dip in traffic to then come back, but that's when things are done well. Sometimes then they do increase again when we've seen, like from a content consolidation perspective. We've known migrations to take 6 months plus, because there's a lot of steps and a lot of planning to make sure we get this correct, because as like the next 2 points allude to, if this is rushed and things aren't done correctly, you can lose a lot of traffic, and then you're doing backtracking ultimately to do a lot of extra work. That's, yeah, you might have thought the migration was expensive, but wait till you mess it up and then have to try and recover it, and the more expense and the time and effort to do that, as well as the loss of revenue you're gonna have because of it. To try and figure out those things post is a lot harder. So really do take the time and attention and care to put this up front, to do the planning, and don't rush things. We'll dive into more around the planning now aspect for the different phases for the actual migration that will happen, to essentially, as we've alluded to mitigate as much risk as possible. First of all, obviously, we need to speak with all stakeholders, get an understanding of what are they wanting out of the migration. So we're all under no illusion, there is a lot of clarity around what's happening and why. As we've alluded to here, it could just be from a content consolidation, we're looking to get performance increase. It could be from a rebrand. We need to obviously talk them through a timeline perspective and show how we'll be involved throughout this process. As the risk overview slide has already talked about, we do need to push back and try and understand, really, is this migration needed? Because at the end of the day, the less migrations you do, the better, and it's going to be from an impact perspective, because you're only going to possibly lose from these. So they really need to have an understanding what can happen with these, rather than it just being oh, I fancy doing this. You need to really understand and get across the fact that this is what can go wrong. This is what you need to understand can happen. So we're all bought into why we're actually doing this, and it's important and it has to be done. As you'll realize here, when we kind of start talking about scope, is that as the SEO, whether that's in-house or working with somebody like ourselves, that quite a lot of this process will be stakeholder management, really trying to get different departments, different teams, members to speak together. There is a lot of that within this, because we need to make sure everybody is on the same page and everybody understands what the implications are and what's required from them to make this migration ultimately as successful as it can be. And in quite a lot of cases, success is coming out the other side with the same level of traffic and just kind of pushing forwards. With that in mind, that they then know from the beginning what they're specifically responsible for to making this project happen. And also the implications of the things that can change, that they are aware of this up front, so we can hopefully mitigate things down the line that, oh, I didn't know about such and such that this was happening. Like, this is all done up front, as I've alluded to. There's going to be a lot of project management, a lot to know around the timings and how this all plays out at different stages. Everybody's aware when things will be happening at the different phases, how long the phases will be. This just gives everybody an overview of key dates and milestones through this process. As an example, if you're doing a redesign, it's not that, oh, we're doing a redesign and we're going to launch the site, for argument's sake, in 3 weeks. No. We, as an SEO agency, would want to be brought into the process before you start even the project of doing the redesign. We want to go through all that process with you to be able to pass back feedback. Like, it could be a case that you're removing all the elements that are currently on the page, that it's going to be a complete UX overhaul, that there's no similarities between that. When we've seen clients or people have done this in the past, that they've had a massive drop in traffic and rankings because there's no similarities across the two, because X elements have been removed and they were the key aspects to what was making that page rank, so that we've then had to retrospectively go through that, add elements back in, we see it recover with time. But this way, at least you can get the feedback in real time that, have you thought about this? If this does this, or removing that, these are possibly the implications. Like, you want this ultimately like real-time feedback of going through this process. It is such a basic thing, but the amount of times that I hear of people doing launches or migrations and putting them live on a Friday, why on earth you want to do that? It's a recipe for further disaster. That launching on for argument's sake, a less busy time, that's out of hours, you've still got team resources on hand to be able to do any changes. Like, a Tuesday is a great day, that you've then got the rest of the time to then, should anything go wrong, you've got time to pick these issues up and fix them, rather than if it goes live on a Friday, no team's available and you can't pick it up till Monday and issues are already occurring. The same is said as well from mapping this out at a high level. You don't want to be doing this coming into, for argument's sake, your best sales period. Like, again, you're just asking for this to go wrong. Like, why would you want to potentially jeopardize the potential of that revenue? Do it in an off season. So for argument's sake, you know that my best sales period, for argument's sake, is Christmas, right? Okay, perfect. We're into January. We know that that's our least amount of revenue is generated in that 1 month. Perfect. That's when we're probably going to look to do the launch. So we need to be starting this process in summer probably, because we need the time to go through all of this. From the teamwork perspective, there's a bit of crossover here again of what we've already talked about. That from the planning stage, that if we know what's going on at different sections and milestones throughout the project, this will allow different either individuals or teams to be able to look at this and know what's required from them to make this migration happen. That, for argument's sake, UX need to have completed the redesign at X stage, copy need to have done the new elements and copy for the design by X, and then the devs need to have done their testing by this stage. So it's a case of this way everybody knows what's expected of them at which point in stage. Unfortunately, not going to please everybody going through this process, but like we've said, we're just trying to minimize impact and get as much people on side as possible, and everybody has a clarity and understands what's going on, when, and what has to be done. As we've talked about these like timelines and things like that, that will probably then be broken down into individual tasks that needed to be completed. And again, everybody can then go away and make sure that they get their bits done. There'll be then reviews done to make sure everything's fine and signed off before we move on to the next section. Again, we'll probably do some internal meetings again for just asking questions, overcoming blockers, and again, that's just to get an understanding, we can't do X because Y hasn't been done yet. So then obviously try and mitigate those and put solutions in place to push this forwards. Might seem overkill, all of this process, but it's better to be like this than the knee-jerk reaction of, oh, we probably should do that, let's go live, it's a Friday, and again, we then just wake up over the next kind of couple of weeks to find that website's just fallen off a cliff. Next, we're going to talk about from the next stage, which is be pre-launch. So everything that we now need to do before the actual migration happens itself. So we're going to just create ultimately a document here that will be done to just define all the requirements from an SEO perspective, so that this is outlined. We can always revert back to this document and make sure everything has been done. So we'll go through a list of some of the kind of like requirements and things that you'd want to think about in this process. That would be things like, are we keeping the same Google Analytics code or tag manager code that's on the site? Our URL structure is going to be the same. What we're doing around meta information, obviously title, descriptions, alt tags, etc. Actual on-page elements like headings. Is this an international site? Are we implementing hreflang? The XML sitemap, is this still being dynamically generated? What are we doing from a structured data on the site? Not that is it having it, it should be having it. Like, is that coming across exactly, or are we what we're doing to improve on that? We want to again look to see how we can have some decent impact straight out the gate, and not obviously just launch with a bloated site and this be an afterthought. Like, we can do a lot of these things ahead of time, again through, ultimately we'll get onto testing. Self-referencing canonicals, like, are they being included, or are you even having the ability to be able to change them? From a performance again perspective, probably a little bit alluding to page speed again, around minifying and again compressed files on from a caching and performance perspective. Is this being done at a server level? How's this all been taken into consideration? Is there any JavaScript elements that have been injected onto the page? Can we look to minimize that and actually not have to use JavaScript to achieve that? Could be just simple things like, are we adding, if we're like an e-com site, I know quite a lot of us love our pop-ups to capture from emails, like what are we doing around that as an element? Again, now we've got this kind of document to always like refer back to when, for argument's sake, we're reviewing new designs. We can then go, brilliant, from an on-page perspective, how does this look and meet our needs? Do we need to make any suggestions or recommendations to help improve this so that everybody is on board with it, and it's not going to just go, for argument's sake, it's a new site, we've stripped out all copy, we've just got images. Like, yes, creative team might absolutely love it, but I can tell you now the in-house SEO team or external agency is not. And that's again where it's finding that balance to make everybody as happy as possible. Again, you can't please everybody. Like we say here, it's just getting everybody to look over things and get on board to understand how this impacts everything. Moving on to looking and just taking into account, like, what's the old site or like the current sites we've got that we're then going to move to, like what assets and things that has it already got, and we need to make a note of all this information. So this could just be things like the current pages, the resources around PDFs or images, to then ultimately doing crawls of the site. Again, like crawlers like OnCrawl, Deep Crawl, being cloud-based, and then you've got more just desktops like Screaming Frog. You could then look at and take performance metrics from tools like SEMrush and Ahrefs to have an idea of kind of what your rankings are and what keywords you've got visibility for, as well as like GA data, GSC, just the log files from the hosting as well. Like, you want to collate all this information so you've got it documented beforehand as well, so ultimately reference back to get this information retrospectively is a lot harder. So to again, like, just be able to refer back to this is only going to be good, because for argument's sake, if we're going to be doing all these, if we're going to be doing redirects, well, doing a crawl of the site to understand URL structure of what it currently is, we'll then be able to map out the redirects. So we do need to know that information, and that's the way of ultimately going about of initially getting it. One thing to kind of note from a redirect perspective is that, for argument's sake, you're about to do this migration, you probably want to have a look at the redirect file, because there could already be a load of redirects in place that you just don't want to like bump those down the page, paste in your redirects, that you're then creating a load of redirect chains that ultimately goes from this page, this one to then to your final page. You just want to go straight to the final page and cut out the middle. We'll get on to like from a testing perspective to see if there are chains that you then remove those extra steps, because when you kind of get past like 6 redirect chains, that like Google will probably stop crawling the page, which you definitely don't want to do, because it then probably means it won't get indexed. The reason you even want the redirects in place in the first place is that you want the Google crawler to be able to, the bot to be able to get from the current page to the new one that you're going to launch. So that again, also it passes the equity from an SEO perspective near enough across. Obviously, having done a crawl of the site, you'll have a list of all of the URLs of the pages now. And what this ultimately will then mean and allow you to do is that for moving forwards, if you can cross-reference this with, for argument's sake, with GA data, Ahrefs or SEMrush like backlink data, so that you can then create like a prioritized list of which URLs you need to do first. Because for argument's sake, if you're doing a site for an e-com that's got like 1 million pages, you can soon start to see that you do need to prioritize this. It's a little bit different if you've got a site of 10 pages that you just get done in like from a redirect mapping perspective in like half an hour. That kind of millions of pages you're going to have to take into account. Manually redirecting all those pages isn't probably going to be time efficient and possible, that you're going to have to do and take into account other options here, so that this way the prioritization helps you to do the manual mapping and attention is done where possible. Again, what we might class as important pages could then be again based on like sales performance, rankings, as well as this other data we've talked around. With this, we've got then different important lists that we can then go through, and ultimately we're looking to create our redirect plan of this is the starting point for the redirect, and this is the end point of the new URL structure. So pretty much briefly, we just talk about the website architecture here again. So this essentially means that if you're, for argument's sake, an e-com site, just looking at in the navigation menu, that they've got a load of category pages here that we probably want to keep the same kind of nav menu overview here, because again, it makes it easy for this Googlebot to crawl, as well as from a passing authority through to those pages from the home page. Makes it probably a little easier that we want to keep that. Also, we want to make sure that on the new site we have those category pages. What you tend to see quite a bit in e-com migrations is that when they're going from an old CMS to a new one, is that the faceted navigation pages, they don't come across. So just making sure that they come and are implemented. Again, you can see this from doing the crawls. The site that you do have these is pages that have been indexed on the old site, that when you do launch that you have got them, because if you don't, again, there'll be that traffic drop off, and that's what we're trying to eliminate. And we can do all of this ahead of time to make sure that we don't fall into those mistakes. If you are doing a complete website overhaul, it is possibly a CMS change as well. Again, this does open the options to doing URL structure changes. So make sure you just review this as an opportunity if things are messy, that you could consolidate them, but you've obviously got to put the plan in place to make sure the redirect plan is there and is all correct to make it as a smooth transition. Now we're going to talk about how to implement a redirect plan. Essentially what we're going to do here is we're just going to have an Excel spreadsheet and go like we can see here, just 2 columns, current URL or old site URL to new URL on the new site. Crawl that we did of all the pages, and we'll be able to have that in the first column. We're then obviously going to have to map out those new pages that we want the page A to redirect to page B from old to new site. To be able to obviously do that, again, if we've said for a small like 10-page site, very easy, you can just manually go through. But again, when we're got millions of pages, this, as I've alluded to, is like takes very time intensive, resource intensive to manually go through that. So that gets very expensive to just spend all the time doing that. That's when obviously some bits of software can come in, again, expensive to do that as well. So this is where the prioritization comes into trying to make sure that that's happened. To make sure it goes as smoothly as possible and mapped to the best and relevant page. There's not necessarily a right page to do the redirect to. Like, you want to do it to the most relevant page. So I'd probably start it exact page, then outside of that, probably subcategory, category, then homepage. Please, please, please don't just go redirect everything to the homepage, because that's just going to kill anything and defeat the whole purpose of going through this. It's worth the time and effort. As here is just as a small side note, the page that we're doing this redirect to, that we want to make sure that it's the page with the canonical tag on that page, so it's the parent page. When we're talking about doing the redirect plan, again, as we've alluded to, redirect chains kind of come in quite a lot here. That's what we're ultimately wanting to avoid. There's probably a lot of inherited baggage that you've got coming into this, so understanding that how that plays out into your redirect plan, because we do want to strip out that, because like we've alluded to, we want to make sure we pass as much authority and make sure the pages do get crawled. This is again where you want to be best buds with your in-house devs or external agency, because they might be able to help you come up with ways of, if we've alluded to, like you've got 1 million pages, that some part of this can be scaled with some automation, or looking at page tags, or who knows, that there might be a way to scale this rather than having to do it all manually. So really that's where speak with your team and stakeholders to see if you can leverage this and their knowledge and resources. We're now at the point where we're just going to do our pre-launch checks and testing, just to make sure that everything we've gone through, all the planning, implementation of all that is correct, because obviously when we go live, this is what we're going to run into. So we might be able to mitigate and just check over these things, because normally, obviously going through this, there are some issues and you can obviously catch them before obviously they come into a bigger issue. So the whole testing phase here is probably more a bit down to the SEO team, because they'll be probably running crawls of the site, again making sure that the redirect plan has worked correctly, not got the redirect changed. They'll probably also want to do like a technical audit of the site, of this new site, making sure that again we've got the canonicals all in place, there's no other glaring obvious. Like, you'd think that these things are simple, but the amount of times that I've seen a site like this done a migration launch and there's a no index site-wide, one small bit of text, and like people then wondered why they're not getting any traffic through to the site. Simple, but these things are easily overlooked because they're in like a staged environment, that they've got that in there. You just need to make sure that this is looked over. Like we say, looking at it from a UX perspective, making sure going then through on-page elements, because these are all templates at the end of the day, that all the product pages, they're all going to be the same. Once you review one of the templates, it's going to be the same across the board. Again, making sure on the crawls that no internal links are broken and things like that. So there's a lot of checks to go through here and a bit of an auditing process, but it's well worth the while, like we say, of just catching that one little bit of code that essentially would prevent the site being indexed moving forward. So it's worth it. Something as well from experience that is worth doing in this process as well is running a document and having it as such as a change log of, these are all the things that we've done through this process of the migration. For argument's sake, in the redesign, we've changed the homepage, these are the elements that we've taken out and these ones that we've added in. URL structures, change these URL structures and done this and this. That will be amazing as a change log, should you ever need it, if things hit the fan, that you can revert back to, because trying to remember everything that's been done and why it's been done is super hard. So just as you're going through this process, having that there will help save you at some point. I can guarantee it. Again, probably this site will probably want to just add it as a new site in GSC. Just check it's all like pulling in the schema markup correctly and things to that effect. That again, testing it on different devices as well should be again another common practice here. Once you've gone through all those steps and you've got sign off, everybody's happy, only at that point do you then consider about pushing it live. You don't push live just because you've got a date to hit. Push it back. You want to go through this as an activity to make sure everything is correct. Not that, oh yeah, it's all fine, we've obviously spent all these months prior. Spend the time and effort to make sure this is all correct. Then we actually come into the last part of it as such, which is obviously doing the migration itself. We've done a lot of work to get to this point that now we actually go to the migration. People see this as just the activity that's done. All the work is front loaded for the majority of it, and everybody's on hands to review it, monitor it as it's going live. Again, just making sure that DNS settings are all checked and pushed to change that. Again, when we do go live, it's a smooth transition. Very, very simply said to obviously do the pushing it live. Then it's going to be coming into this perspective, now monitoring and review and tweaks and changes should it be needed. Obviously, with the testing phase in part 3, you will have caught a majority of these things. Now that we've just done the actual migration itself, we just need to do a review and just go through this as a process of this event and how things kind of went on. So pretty much here, essentially, you've got the site migration has happened, and we need to just make sure that, again, that's accessible by both by people and bots. So again, looking at logs, files, looking in at GSC data, just looking back through and looking at your pre-launch checklist, and all that information has obviously been safely achieved, and that we're obviously all happy and it's on the site. This might be when we then want to just benchmark performance on a page speed level again as a secondary thing, because there might be some ways we can further optimize moving forwards. Looking probably to make sure that all pages are included within in the sitemap, and the sitemap's obviously been indexed in GSC and Bing Webmaster Tools. As well, for some other further bits of review and testing, is that just grabbing some of the URLs, if we've mentioned, of some of those important pages out of those lists, whether that's from a traffic or revenue perspective, and just doing a fetch and render, actually looking in that render screen that what the page looks like, is it what you think you see, and that everything's all okay in that perspective. Obviously, just as a reassurance, we want to make sure and just go through and check these, just so we know we're 100% safe that this has all gone through. Again, this post-migration review, these are things that we'll obviously have already checked in the pre-launch testing phase. We're again just making sure that post-live is all fine and perfect, and we aren't running into any issues here. You might find that something actually in transition has not been caught. Again, I've sometimes seen from an internal link perspective, somebody's not updated the database, and these things that we've had to then quickly look to resolve them. But making sure that you are, again, checking the different stages. Just as an ongoing thing, this is the post-live monitoring stage. This is, again, as we're alluding to, weeks and months post-live, that again, we're just, again, looking back in GA data. How's this doing from performance on traffic, sales, against what we originally had as the benchmark data? Again, if we're starting to see things dip or things like that, again, looking into it and digging into it to try and find out where these things are coming from, to then debug it. We know there's going to be fluctuations across the board as this does re-index, and if that is necessary, and from a URL structure change, that again, we're seeing how's that playing out from a ranking and traffic performance. Again, we've got the benchmark data to begin with to know how this does play out. We've probably made a note of featured snippet performance as well in the benchmark data. If traffic has dropped up, for argument's sake, we might have just come out of the featured snippet. So just trying to tie bits of information together to know, paint a picture of where performance is either dipped or not, or where the increases have sometimes come from. We can ultimately understand the full picture to how and why that's been caused. We're probably running probably to begin with daily crawls, then probably going to weekly crawls, using a cloud-based crawl. It could even be running something like Content King for real-time crawl analysis on top priority pages. Probably running log file analysis, getting the log files from the web hosting to then review them, just to make sure everything's smoothly and operating as should, and bots are able to access the pages. Again, also looking at tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush from a backlink perspective, that all those pages have been mapped across, and that everything's gone smoothly. We've not lost those backlink and referring domains authority within there. And that is very easy. and you will love it. No, it's one of those that it can get quite stressful nearer the time, but it takes a lot of time and energy and planning up front that you don't really want to be doing anything post migration. Ultimately, you want to have done it all up front. Again, we're just trying to monitor and make sure the work that we had done and all the hard work pre-launch is gone all smoothly. There is a lot of information there, and as you've kind of heard and seen, there's a lot of stakeholder management, a lot of project management to kind of make sure everybody knows what's been doing at what points. You can obviously go through this video again and look at the different points of some of the information that's important. But again, from an SEO perspective, we've got the checklist in the description below that you can download to hopefully make your life a little bit easier to knowing what's important for yourself to do the internal checks. So you can potentially do this for yourself. It's on a little bit more smaller scale. If you want the reassurance and help of someone who's been there and done that before, obviously you're more than welcome to reach out to us and potentially have a conversation about working with us. Our information's below, and you can reach out. Thank you very much for obviously taking the time to listen all the way through. I know it's a very long one, but hopefully you found it helpful. Please leave a like and a comment below.